Hi everyone, welcome back to LinguaDiscovery. My name is Josh, and today we're tackling a big question. Is half of the French language really useless? Whether you're a native French speaker or someone who had to learn it in school, you've probably noticed that the language has a lot of quirks. From silent letters and inconsistent spelling to complicated liaison rules, many features of French can feel, well, a bit excessive. But does this make it less useful, or is there more to the story? Let's dive into this entrancing topic. The modern French language descends from the Latin spoken by the Roman Empire, specifically the Vulgar Latin used by the common people. Following the fall of the Roman Empire, the region now known as France experienced a series of invasions and migrations, notably by the Franks, a Germanic tribe. This led to the blending of Latin with various local languages and dialects, including Celtic languages and later influences from Norse and Arabic. Over the centuries, this evolving language underwent significant changes in grammar, vocabulary, and pronunciation, eventually emerging as Old French by the 9th century. The development continued through Middle French, shaped by political, cultural, and literary influences, leading to the modern French we recognize today. This is the main reason behind why French sounds so different compared to the other Romance languages. Let's also not forget that French is one of the most widely spoken languages in the world. It's the official language of 29 countries, spoken across 5 continents, from Europe to Africa to Canada and parts of the Caribbean. French holds an important place in global communication, diplomacy, and culture. It's even one of the 6 official languages of the United States and widely used in international organizations like the European Union. In total, around 300 million people speak French, making it one of the most influential languages on the planet. French was also once the global lingua franca up until World War I, though English has now replaced French as the new universal medium of communication. The French language still holds an important status in an international context. Here's the irony. While French is so widespread and important, learning it can be a huge headache, especially if you're dealing with its more useless features. So, what makes French feel arbitrary and frustrating at times? One of the most confusing features for learners of French is its silent letters, particularly at the ends of words. For example, in words like petit, small, beaucoup, a lot, or froid, cold, the last letters are silent. So, why are they even there? This is a remnant of older forms of French where these letters were actually pronounced. As the spoken language evolved, pronunciations simplified, but the written form did not follow. It's as if French wants to hang on to its history, even if those letters don't serve a practical purpose in modern speech. For example, the word cheval, horse, once had a plural form, chevaux, where the final S was pronounced. Over time, that S sound dropped, but in modern French, we still write it as chevaux, even though the pronunciation hasn't changed in centuries. This isn't just a quirky feature, it actually adds a layer of difficulty for learners who have to memorize when to pronounce letters and when to ignore them. Then there's the issue of inconsistent spelling, especially when it comes to verb conjugations. French is notorious for having the same pronunciation for multiple different spellings. Take the verb parler, to speak, for example. In the present tense, parle, parle, and parle all sound exactly the same, but they're spelled differently depending on the subject. This makes French especially hard to write accurately. If you're not a native speaker, good luck figuring out which form to use just by hearing a word. This problem extends beyond verbs. The sound o can be spelled in several different ways. O as in water, O as in chateau, castle, or just O as in mot for word. For someone learning French, this inconsistency can feel maddening. While these different spellings may preserve a historical connection to Latin or Old French, they complicate what could otherwise be a more straightforward system. Related to inconsistent spelling is the issue of homophones, words that sound the same but are spelled differently and have different meanings. French is filled with these. For instance, vert, worm, vert, green, vert, toward, and vert, glass, all sound exactly the same when spoken but are completely different in meaning. This can lead to confusion in spoken communication, as you need to rely heavily on context to figure out which word is being used. For learners, this adds another layer of difficulty, since even simple sentences can be misunderstood if you're not paying close attention. Then there are the famous liaison rules in French. Liaison occurs when the last consonant of one word, which is normally silent, is pronounced because the next word begins with a vowel. For example, in les amis, the friends, the normally silent S and les is pronounced, turning it into something like les amis when read aloud. While this may make the language sound more fluid, it's another tricky rule for learners, as there are many exceptions and specific situations where liaison is required or forbidden. The complexities of French articles, definite, indefinite, and partitive, are deeply intertwined with the gender and quantity of nouns. Definite articles, de, la, l'apostrophe, les, specify particular items and change according to the noun's gender and number, with le for masculine singular, la for feminine singular, l'apostrophe before vowels, and les for plural. Indefinite articles, un, une, des introduce unspecified items, where un is used for masculine and une for feminine singular, while des serves plural forms, but it doesn't convey singularity. Partitive articles, du, de la, de l'apostrophe, des indicate an unspecified quantity of something, often used with mass nouns, where du is for masculine, de la for feminine, de l'apostrophe for singular nouns beginning with a vowel, and des for plural. These particles not only reflect the grammatical gender and number of nouns, but also create nuances in meaning that require learners to navigate the intricate rules governing their use, often leading to confusion and complexity in mastering the language. Although I suppose if you compare these rules to that of German, maybe they aren't that bad. Despite these quirks, French remains incredibly useful and important on a global scale. It's a language of diplomacy, literature, and international business. For native speakers, these rules and exceptions are second nature, and they might even argue that the complexity adds to the richness of the language. But for the millions of people around the world who are learning French, the inconsistencies, silent letters, and complicated grammar rules can feel unnecessarily difficult, leading to frustration. As a Canadian student who had to learn French in a province outside of Quebec, I can personally attest to these frustrations. In Canada, French is an official language, and most students are required to study it for several years. But outside Quebec, French can feel more like an abstract school subject than a living, breathing language. We spend countless hours trying to master verb conjugations, silent letters, and tricky pronunciation rules, only to find ourselves struggling to hold a basic conversation. One of the biggest challenges is reconciling the classroom French we learn with the Quebec French spoken by native speakers. Quebecois French has its own unique features, and even though the fundamentals are the same, the pronunciation and slang can make it feel like a different language entirely. For many students outside Quebec, learning French can feel like a long uphill battle, made harder by the sheer complexity of the language itself. It's no wonder many of us come away feeling like half the language is, indeed, useless. So, why does this complexity matter? For learners, these challenges can be demotivating. In a world where languages like English and Spanish are more streamlined and phonetic, at least in comparison with French, French stands out as one that requires a lot of memorization, exceptions, and arbitrary rules. While this can add richness to the language for native speakers, it presents a real obstacle for the millions of people who are trying to learn French as a second language. At the end of the day, the question of whether half of French is useless depends on your perspective. From a functional standpoint, many of the silent letters, inconsistent spellings, and extra particles might seem unnecessary, especially if you're coming from a language like English. But from a cultural and historical point of view, These features are part of what makes French French. They link the language to its Latin roots, its literary traditions, and its role in shaping world history. So while French may be frustrating at times, it's also a language that's deeply tied to its past, and that's what makes it unique. Thanks for joining me today for this deep dive into the quirks of the French language. If you've got any thoughts or personal experiences with French, leave them in the comments, and I'll see you in the next episode of Lingua Discovery. À bientôt!